Day 1. An empty swamp. September 11, 1941. Arlington, Virginia. A tidal flat covered in marsh grass and shallow mud along the banks of the Potomac River. Nobody pays attention to this land. Nobody imagines that 1 year from now, this exact spot will be home to the largest office building in the history of civilization. A few miles away in Washington, D.C., the War Department is collapsing. Not from enemy attack. From internal chaos. The department is spread across 17 buildings scattered throughout the city. A general who needs to consult a colleague must first hail a cab. A classified message must pass through 3 separate buildings before reaching its destination. On the eve of a world war, American military efficiency resembles a dysfunctional government agency. Brigadier General Brehan Somerville sits across from Secretary of War Henry Stimson with a single sheet of paper. The numbers are straightforward. 24,000 War Department employees. Scattered across 17 buildings. Estimated man-hours lost weekly to coordination, 40,000. We are preparing to fight a world war, Somerville says, and our army cannot hold a meeting on time. Stimson studies the paper. Then asks, "What do you need?" Somerville answers, "1 building. A single structure that contains everything. The largest office building ever constructed." The impossible problem. To understand the depth of the challenge, the numbers must be seen clearly. The War Department needed a building with 6.5 million square feet of office space. For comparison, the tallest skyscraper in New York at the time, the Empire State Building, contained only 2.768 million square feet. The required building had to be more than twice the size of the largest structure on Earth. Architects ran the calculations. A conventional building of these dimensions would require 35 floors. But Washington, D.C. had a law. No building could exceed 130 feet in height, preserving sight lines to the Capitol dome. Tall construction was prohibited. The solution was horizontal expansion. But horizontal expansion created a new problem: distance. Design the building as a rectangle, and an employee walking from one end to the other might spend 15 minutes in transit. That doesn't solve the military logistics problem. It only changes its shape. This is where a young architect named George Bergstrom raised an unconventional idea. Why not build a Pentagon? The geometry of genius. The logic of the Pentagon shape was simple but brilliant. 5 concentric pentagonal rings, each connected to the others by 10 radial corridors. The result? From any point inside the building, a maximum of 7 minutes of walking to any other point. A 6.5 million square foot building where no one was more than 7 minutes from any colleague. But the site had complications. The original land selected at Arlington Farm had geographical constraints that forced irregular pentagonal sides. Bergstrom designed 5 unequal sides. And the very irregularity born of land constraints became the building's singular visual identity, a shape unlike any other structure ever built. July 30, 1941. Franklin Roosevelt approved the plans. A building with 6.5 million square feet, 17.5 miles of corridors, 131 stairways, 19 elevators, 284 restrooms, and capacity for 40,000 employees. Nobody asked the obvious question: who builds it? And in how long? The man who made the impossible possible. Leslie Groves was a U.S. Army colonel. 45 years old. Heavy-set. Blunt. The kind of man who is effective rather than popular. Colleagues said you were either fighting with Groves or working with him. There was no middle ground. September 1, 1941. Groves received his assignment: build a War Department building. Initial budget: $35 million. Timeline: 1 year. Groves reviewed the blueprints, checked the numbers, and said, "This building cannot be built for $35 million. We need at least $83 million. Congress resisted, but it was 1941. Europe was burning. Japan was advancing. The budget was approved. Groves packed his office and drove to Arlington. September 11, 1941. The first shovel broke ground. 10 days after the blueprints were approved. 9 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor. Groves wrote the numbers on a board. 1.5 million tons of concrete. 100,000 tons of steel. 680 miles of pipe. 150,000 miles of electrical wire. Time available, 16 months. The crash program. Groves made 2 fundamental decisions that changed everything. First, the building would be occupied in phases rather than delivered complete. The moment any section was finished, employees moved in. This meant Groves could demonstrate tangible progress. More critically, it meant political pressure over the budget eased because results were visible and real. Second, 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This was unprecedented in the construction industry at the time. Contractors argued that exhausted workers made errors. Groves answered, hire more workers and control errors through supervision. At peak construction, 14,000 workers occupied the site on a single day. A small temporary city grew around the building. Restaurants, banks, small shops. Groves arranged a dedicated bus line to bring workers from across the Washington metropolitan area. But the greatest challenge was neither workers nor money. It was steel. The steel crisis. January 1942. 2 months into construction. Pearl Harbor had happened. National priorities shifted overnight. Steel became the primary military commodity. Tanks, ships, aircraft, artillery. Every ton of steel you produced went directly to the war effort. The War Production Board issued an order. Civilian construction must surrender its steel allocation to weapons manufacturing. The definition of civilian included the Pentagon. Groves faced an existential problem. The building meant to serve as the command center of the war might be halted by that same war. Groves went to his engineers. They proposed a radical solution: replace reinforced concrete with low steel concrete construction. This was uncharted territory at the time. Structural architects were skeptical. Groves asked one question: will the building stand? The answer was yes. Then do it. The techniques tested under that crisis, pre-stressed concrete, minimum steel structural systems, became standard practice across the construction industry for decades afterward. Crisis, once again, was the mother of invention. Innovation under pressure. Building the Pentagon was a working engineering laboratory. Problems that emerged every day demanded solutions nobody had previously conceived. Ventilation. A building of this scale had never been built. No HVAC system existed designed for 40,000 occupants. Engineers designed from scratch. What they invented became the ancestor of modern commercial HVAC systems used in every large building today. Water distribution. 284 restrooms, hundreds of sinks, industrial kitchens. Water pressure had to be consistent at every point in the building. Engineers invented a multi-stage water distribution system that was later adopted in high-rise construction worldwide. Internal traffic flow. How do you move 40,000 people through a single structure without corridors becoming gridlock? Engineers invented an internal zoning system. Each pentagonal ring functioned as a self-contained neighborhood with its own services. This principle became the design foundation for large office buildings everywhere. The Pentagon was not a building. It was an engineering university whose graduation project happened to be concrete and steel. Political resistance. But Groves' challenges were not only engineering. Politics is harder than concrete. Congress was nervous. A building for 40,000 people? What happens after the war? Representatives argued this would become a bureaucratic monster. We don't want big government. Groves testified before Congress. This is a temporary structure. After the war, we can convert it to a hospital. Congress was pacified. City planners objected. The building would obstruct views of national memorials. Groves relocated the site by several hundred yards. Problem solved. Roosevelt intervened personally. The president worried the building would damage Washington's architectural character. He demanded the height be reduced. Groves calculated that reducing height meant adding a sixth ring, which meant higher cost. Roosevelt backed down. Groves used to say that project management requires three things: a good engineer, sufficient money, and permission to let the engineer do his job. You usually get the first two and not the third. The first 90 days. The project motto was, "Every day, 90% better than yesterday." Groves designed a daily control system. Every morning at 6 a.m., a report of the previous 24 hours' progress was on his desk. Every hour of delay required a reason. Every reason required a solution. In the first 90 days, something happened that construction experts still write about. Complete foundation work, full concrete pour for the base slab, and structural framing of the first floor across the entire building, all accomplished in 90 days. A speed no comparable project had ever matched. The secret was not only the number of workers. Groves had taken one principle seriously: parallelization. In traditional construction, each phase must complete before the next begins. Groves broke that rule. While the foundations for Section 1 were being poured, engineers were designing Section 2, and suppliers were ordering materials for Section 3. This approach carried risk. If Section 1 required a change that affected later sections, work could fall weeks behind. Groves accepted that risk and built a monitoring system that communicated any design change instantly to every parallel team on site. The system Groves invented in 1941 is today called Agile Project Management, and it is the foundation of every major modern construction and technology project. The forgotten workers. Historians write about Groves, about Bergstrom's blueprints, about Roosevelt's decisions. But the 14,000 workers who labored daily in the mud and cold, their names appear in no book. They came from across the country. Southerners fleeing economic hardship. Black workers toiling under the height of Jim Crow segregation laws, in a construction site that maintained official racial separation. Irish Americans, Italian Americans, Polish Americans. Men who needed the work and didn't ask questions about what they were building. One worker interviewed after the war described it this way: "We didn't know exactly what we were building. We only knew it mattered. When the engineers were in a hurry, we were in a hurry. When they worked nights, we worked nights. There was just this feeling that the building had to get done." The project accident record shows 17 workers lost their lives during construction. Their names appear nowhere. No memorial bears them. The Pentagon stands on invisible sacrifices. Without Groves, the building wouldn't have been managed. Without Bergstrom, it wouldn't have been designed. But without those 14,000 men, none of it existed at all. January 15, 1943. January 15, 1943. 16 months and 4 days after groundbreaking. The Pentagon officially opened. The final numbers: 6.5 million square feet of office space, 17.5 miles of corridors, 131 stairways, 19 elevators, 284 restrooms, 672 windows, 4,200 clocks. Initial capacity: 33,000 employees. Final cost: $83 million. Exactly what Groves had said from the beginning. On opening day, the first group of War Department employees walked through the doors. The first command staff meeting held inside the Pentagon took place that same week. Coordination that previously took hours now took minutes. The building worked exactly as designed. The Pentagon in World War II became what it was meant to be, the operational brain of the largest war machine in human history. The shadow of Groves. But Groves didn't stay at the Pentagon. In that same year of 1942, while the building was still under construction, he received a new assignment. One vastly larger and entirely classified. Leslie Groves was appointed director of the Manhattan Project, the project that built the atomic bomb. This was not coincidence. Roosevelt and Stimson had watched Groves take an impossible project and deliver it on time, under budget, at unprecedented scale. They wanted that same man responsible for the most impossible project in history. The Pentagon was not just a building. It was a test. And Groves passed it with full marks. The hidden legacy. Historians write about the Pentagon simply: world's largest office building. American command center. Built during wartime. But this narrative is incomplete. The Pentagon triggered an industrial revolution in construction. Techniques invented during its building became industry standard. Parallel project management. Low steel concrete structures. Large space ventilation systems. Internal zoning of massive buildings. Every time you enter a large shopping mall, and the ventilation works. Every time you navigate a large office building, and the corridors make sense. Every time a major project runs with parallel teams, you are touching the legacy of the Pentagon. Today the Pentagon houses 23,000 military and civilian employees. Thousands walk its 17.5 miles of corridors every day. Its cafeteria serves 17,000 meals daily. A small city inside a single building, exactly what its designers envisioned in 1941. Modern construction is indebted to 16 months of emergency decision-making under the pressure of war. What history teaches. When historians write about the Pentagon, they typically focus on what building, what dimensions, what date. But the why is more important. The Pentagon demonstrated that when a nation applies collective will toward a single objective, impossible obstacles move. Not through magic. Because human beings, when they understand why they are working, change how they work. The Pentagon also demonstrated that bureaucracy can move when given the right leader. Groves worked with the system, not against it. When Congress resisted, he compromised. When Roosevelt intervened, he used numbers to persuade. When steel disappeared, he found alternatives. He never declared the mission impossible. He broke it into pieces that were possible. And perhaps the most important lesson, pessimistic forecasts are usually wrong. When Groves said $35 million wasn't enough, everyone thought he was exaggerating. When he said 16 months was sufficient, everyone laughed. Both predictions proved exactly correct. What appears impossible is usually impossible not because of the nature of the problem, but because of a shortage of will, experience, and leadership. Conclusion: The Quiet Revolution. September 11, 1941. Arlington, Virginia. A swamp. A shovel. A colonel with a plan. January 15, 1943. Same location. The largest office building in the history of human civilization. 16 months. $83 million. 14,000 workers. 6.5 million square feet. The Pentagon was built for war. But its legacy is constructive. Its building techniques appear in every modern city on Earth. Its project management model has inspired industries across every sector. Its five-sided geometry has become a symbol recognized by children worldwide. But beyond all of this, the Pentagon carries one simple lesson: crisis, properly managed, becomes the greatest engine of progress. Not because pressure forces compliance, because it clarifies priorities. When you know what must happen, How to make it happen is no longer a mystery. It becomes an engineering problem. America in 1941 faced an impossible challenge: build the largest building in history, in the fastest time available, with minimum resources, in the middle of a world war. They succeeded not by ignoring the impossible, but by breaking it into solvable parts. Every day one piece. Every week one phase. Every month one victory. And in the end, 16 months later, a building that still stands, still functions, still astonishes, not because of the grandeur of its architecture, but because of the story of its creation. Names like Eisenhower and Patton are remembered. Names like Leslie Groves and the thousands of chemists, engineers, and workers who built the command center of the free world are forgotten. Yet without them, no army moved. Without them, no strategy was coordinated. Without them, the war looked different. More than any military victory, more than any new weapon, more than any battle strategy, the Pentagon stands as a monument to a simple truth. When human beings are forced to find a way, they discover capabilities they never imagined they possessed.